We regret to announce the death of our beloved mother, grandmother, sister and friend, Mrs. Theresa Debique Nee Williams, better known as Eric or Titi, formerly of Sunbelt, who passed away at her residence at City Gate on Saturday, 15th November 2014. She was 72 years. She was predeceased by her husband, Mr. Eric Levi Debique, proprietor of Harbourlight Inn, City Gate and St. Lucia Pride. Left to mourn are her children, Julian Williams of New Village, Thelma Williams of Waterworks Road, Sonia Williams of City Gate, Helena Debique Eugene of Carolee Gardens, teacher at the Cyrus Simmons Secondary School, Erica Debique, health aide at the Enchipo Health Center. Stepchildren, Elizabeth Lynette Lima of City Gate, Malcolm Lima of Chabot, Trevor James of Trinidad. Grandchildren, Doniel Lee Miller Harrison of the U.S., Johan Alexander, Alyssa Alexander, Lenny Alcindor, Jade William, John Lynn Debique, student at the Cyrus Simmons Secondary School. Sisters, Mrs. Emma Powlette of Independence City and family. Miss Juliana, also known as Julie Leonard of MNC Liquor Store and family. Mrs. Annette Cauldron Gabriel of Ciceron and family. Mrs. Veronica Neil Devaux of the U.S. and family. Brothers, Mr. Alistair Neil and family, Mr. Ronald, also known as Reds Neil of Ravine Chabot. Stepmother, Mrs. Melvina Neil of Ravine Chabot. Daughter-in-law, Mrs. Gina Williams of New Village. Son-in-law, Mr. Larry Eugene of Carolee Gardens. Brothers-in-law, Mr. Errol, also known as Dow's Powlette. Mr. Winston, also known as Gomes Gabriel of Ciceron. Her dearest special friend, Mr. Clement Emmanuel of Mondador. Other family, the Jeremy families of Cedars, Boabatat and Babono. The Dujo and Jeffers family of Boabatat. The Neal families of Sunbelt, Barbados and St. Vincent. The Williams families of Sarot and Millet. Mrs. Mavis Alphonse Wilson and family of Hospital Road. Mr. and Mrs. Gregory Mathurine and family of Corinth. Friends, Mr. and Mrs. Marvin Phillips of St. Martin. Mrs. Yolande Shalry and family of Bonterre. Mrs. Alva Cassius and family of Grand Riviere. Mrs. Lucita Boxhill and family of Citygate. The Montoute family of New Village. Mrs. Paulina Eugene and family of Cedars. Mrs. Beryl Edwards of New Village. Mrs. Mildred Bissett of Gara. The Gregg family of Barbados, Miss Susie Simmons of the Methodist Church of Castries, Miss Jean, her longtime friend of Hospital Road, Azira Burton of La Clery Health Center, godchildren, Mr. Richard Thomas of Johnson's Hardware, Miss Allison James, Mr. Benton George, Mr. Chris George, her beloved Women's League of the Methodist Church, her doctors, Dr. Gavin Melville, Dr. Deborah Louisi, Dr. Janine Stanley, many other relatives and friends too numerous to mention. The funeral service of the late Mrs. Theresa Debique Nee Williams, better known as Ma Eric or Titi, will be held on Saturday, 29th November 2014 at the Castries Methodist Church on Chisel Street at 2 p.m. Then to the Shock Cemetery for burial. The body now lies at Crick's Funeral Home Limited, Vidbutay.